2024 was some year for immigration. Like it was a crazy year. Like it was the permanent PR targets, those got reduced. International students, like that was a big one. LMIA, spousal permits, a ton of stuff. And so I got Blayne Kumar of IMMproved. I mean, a great tool if you want to know what's going on in immigration, Canadian immigration at any point in time. So just kind of like what should we expect in 2025? What does what does all the political higgy haga mean for for immigration? How do we have a better immigration conversation in Canada? And how do we make this all work for us? Enjoy. So 2024 was a pretty interesting year for Canadian immigration, honestly. I mean, there was the international student caps, there was changing PR targets for the next, I think, 3 years or so. LMIA had a ton of changes. They also stopped flag polling, if I remember. And I think for me is, especially with what happened last week, where Trudeau said he was going to step down, and the Liberals have been a big proponent of immigration. From your perspective, like if we look at 2024 and we take a look at all that happened then, are there any things that are like you're like, oh, we need to look out for this now? Are there any things that were like, oh yeah, they were always coming? Just kind of recapping last year and how it's showing up in 2025. That's kind of what I want to look at.
Yeah, taking a look at the whole 2024 was a crazy period. I am being in immigration for as long, and many people have been in it for a long period of time. We've always seen ebbs and flows, but this was a very big change because it was also a huge uptake, right? It was almost doubling traditional numbers. Usually they're at 250,000 pre-Trudeau period, and then really went up. So with big uptakes is a big drop as well. So I think that's what we saw. There is a, you know, there's a consideration of of an election year coming up, and they wanted to kind of get ahead of the conservatives in terms of policies. It depends who you speak to from a political side, whether the Liberals also maybe wanted to try to beat down immigration for, knowing that they may not win the next election, that they want to kind of hand off a dish that wasn't ready. So there's a lot to take in from 2024, but there was a lot of changes. No one really was, the only group that was kind of spared in this so far was like spousal and refugee applicants so far. I think that's going to change. Spousal is probably going to be fine. That's a program that really has little changes in spousal sponsorships for PR, but everything else was impacted pretty much from work permits, LMIs, students, pretty much from all around immigration, there was some sort of changes. So a lot of changes happened last year. I think this year it's going to be a little bit calmer. There's going to be a lot less, I expect a lot less changes. They've already done a lot of announcements from last year, but there could also be changes coming. I could see maybe in the refugee area, there will be some changes there. So there's a lot more to expect.
I think one of the things I struggled with, and maybe the word is not struggle, but it was just like, and I hope that someone doesn't report me to Mark Miller when I say this, but I saw someone call it like, you just felt like we were in an open mic session with immigration changes. Just things just kept pouring out. And I've seen reports of stuff that the editor didn't announce it. There's this fella I follow, Matthew, and there's something he pointed out one time where there was a change that should have been done a different way, but then it was done another way, or stuff they just ignored it. So there was just all that, just all those changes, and then it felt like what it led us to was a place where the anti-immigration rhetoric just kind of just went up, and just like everyone. I mean, like I said when I interviewed Daniel Bernhard of ICC, I said immigrants have just become the scapegoats for everything. Like, oh, housing immigrants, and I just want, I mean, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, just trying to get if that's the same feeling you get, where you just felt like we just literally took the immigrants and threw them on the bus, like, yo, you are the reason why everything has happened, and so you are going to get caught. It felt that way a bit, but I mean, I do know probably that's not what it is, but it just kind of felt that way to me at some point.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, first off, this isn't the first time in history or in other countries where there is there's an immigrant population or a group of folks that are usually during a political situation when things aren't going well that's there. So it just all depends on who's there could be several right at there's more than one truths that exist at once, right? So to look at that perspective, there was a pretty maybe the policy was around the visitor visas and like that sweeping approvals that went through right after COVID, and that created a lot of issues. We just had a huge influx of people coming in. So maybe that was what was being referred to, what you're referring to earlier, and that created a lot of challenges that we're still kind of dealing with. So but that's definitely has happened, and we also have to keep in mind that we are the closest neighbor to the United States, and we tend to adopt a lot of American issues into Canada. Now, granted, the immigration in Canada, personally, I've noticed that there is definitely some gaps that we're noticing and some challenges there. Just the numbers, and also that we're going to have larger numbers. Just if you're going to double the number for permanent residents, you're gonna have more immigrants. You're gonna have more challenges, more issues. But I do believe that the public sentiment may have also picked up quite a bit from the U.S. A lot of immigration is one of the biggest issues in the U.S., and it is a pretty big difference in terms of Canadian issues with the border crossings from Mexico, for example, whereas our neighbors are Americans. So that's one thing that definitely had an impact. But and then also it was a lot of immigration, and was it prepared, was Canada prepared for the intake? Housing pricing, rental properties were going up, students, like you're hearing the news. And the thing is too is when you look at it, at the end of the day, we speak to the things that make headlines, right? And unfortunately, we're in a society where headlines is what yields everything. And when you look at it from a statistical point, sometimes headlines don't actually reflect statistical situations or the actual numbers. And that's the problem too. So it depends. But I could tell you that immigration, there's a lot of room for improvements that needs to happen. And Canada has a phenomenal opportunity to do that. But unfortunately, there is some. I think Canada's suffered quite a bit of brand damage in the last 1 or 2 years when it comes to the immigration side of things. And I'm hoping that that doesn't carry on too long, and we're able to still be considered a welcoming country and a country that's still positive in immigration. But yeah.
Hmm. It was some, yeah, honestly, it was some, yeah. Now, if we look ahead to 2025, I mean, we kicked off the year with this Trudeau's going at some point. Um, we'll have an election at some point. What are your thoughts? Like, just from someone who's been in this space for a while, what are your thoughts in general? Like, do you have any? If you look at all the rhetoric going on, things that are being said, all the rules they've released over time, you think anything's going to change? You think it's going to? I know you mentioned a bit that's going to be calmer, but just trying to get a bit specific. Like, so in terms of being calmer, is being calmer that will focus more on the elections and stuff, and we'll keep
Well,
going with all that happened in 2024, or it's been calmer? Oh, I don't know. Like, what's been calmer?
well, after a Category 5 hurricane, anything, you know, anything else is going to be calmer. So I think that's what I want to make sure it's clear about. Like I just think that a huge aggressive approach was taken in immigration, for better or for worse. Some policies I think are good, some policies maybe not so good. But either way, there's a Category 5. I would call, maybe let's call it Category 4 to be conservative on that side. But so yeah, I do think this year is going to be calmer. I think this year it's going to be just focused on um, the election side. It just depends. Again, there's multiple truths. If you believe that, our governments, that they're trying to stick it to the conservatives and they want to really put things down in a hard place, so that way the conservative talking points 4 years from now, 5 years from now, isn't that great. You could think that, or you could think that, so it just depends. But it is going to be calmer because I think this is going to be focused on election year. I think there's a lot of big changes already in there. There's not much more room. There is some room to go in different areas, but not a ton more. And I do think that Canadian immigration isn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
I think that I think forever, I shouldn't say forever, but for a very long time, all parties understood immigration was important, and I really don't think the Conservative government thinks otherwise either. I'm hopeful that there's going to be more economic driving considerations. I do think there's a phenomenal opportunity for business immigration that we really need to look at. We need to look at international money coming into Canada and not just being into real estate, for example, which has been one of the big challenges of our real estate market as well. I wouldn't say a big challenge, but it's definitely a factor of that. Can we have that money going towards businesses and folks who are retiring from their businesses, and maybe they could sell those businesses off? I think there's a lot of great opportunity there. So yeah, I think that I don't think anything's going to happen this year in 2025 or anything dramatic. Um, I think it's kind of where we're going to see some interesting stuff is maybe in express entries, but you'll probably see a lot of French draws. You'll see some transportation. You'll see some trades draws come up. You'll see some healthcare for sure. STEM, maybe STEM. You also want to pay attention to the job market. With AI and technology coming the way it is, oof, like you got to pay
Yeah.
attention to the job market too. So, it's you want to pay attention to labor market information.
Mm.
So pay attention to labor market information to get a good gauge of how that's looking. Because labor market, not just in terms of policy, but even your own employment. So for many people need to figure out their own work, their own employment situation for getting the points needed for permanent residency. So you want to pay attention to the labor market as well and be mindful of that.
Yeah, I get the sense that what you just said right now is really for folks who are in Canada already. I think,
Yes.
yeah, a general question I want to ask is, and probably speaks to those who are in Canada too. What how for anyone looking to either switch from student visas or to like a PR, or at least or move to the CEC draws, or for someone who's outside Canada and looking to come in this year, like how do you think they should approach immigration this year? Is it a do you feel like it's still the same thing, just watching the job market, or are there like certain programs, specific programs you think they should look out for? Like, how would someone, like, what's the best way? Maybe not best way, and I don't like the word best because he assumes that like that's the only way. But like, what's in your opinion, like, what's a good way to kind of think of moving to Canada or switching from a temporary stay to or a student visa to a work permit or something more permanent, like a permanent residency in 2025?
Right. So the first thing is to be mindful of what options you could actually look for, right? So, what options do you have available? Some folks from some countries have limited options. Sometimes there is the young professionals or working holiday options available. Sometimes you're working at a company and they could transfer you, and there's options there. We have to see if those points, by the way, those great points that happen in those cases may not be impacted in those changes that are coming up. So for those who are coming to Canada, is first understand your options fully, and you want to understand what's there, and then start looking at the labor market as a big indication for what does Canada need, what type of skill sets do they need right now, and also in addition to that, the French language at the moment is still a pretty predominant category at the moment. So, you know, you want to look at that. So healthcare, as I mentioned, healthcare is definitely one. Um, Trades could be one. Mind you, it's not a huge draw, and there may not be huge ones. There is definitely STEM opportunities too. I don't know how that's going to play out with the labor market this year. So it does depend on your background, but you want to first understand, do a proper assessment. Speak to a trusted immigration consultant or lawyer whose interest is really trying to help navigate you through understanding that. You could look at, there's solutions out there like, our platform Improved that could kind of help you understand your options and stay on top of changes when immigration changes. So there's ways to kind of explore that. if you're looking at study permits and you want to come through study, you really should think about taking specific programs, just like the labor market Canada has identified which areas that they're interested in. That translates to the education side as well. So, some programs does make it a little easier for you to bring your spouse, for example, or doing a master's program in Canada. And some of those will yield to a work permit. So it's far more complex now, and it's so much more important to plan and to know what the real deal is, and you have to be prepared for that to change, right? So I could tell you that a lot of our clients at Bright, um, I think almost everyone I've spoken to knows that things change very frequently. And, with the advice we give to someone coming over to Canada from last year was, here's what a work permit looks like, here's what education looks like, here's what a work permit looks like, here's what PR looks like. But this is a 3 to 5 year journey, 3 year to 5 year journey. And the chances of it changing between now and then is incredibly high, right?
That's
And,
scary.
and yeah, and it's honestly been the truth since I've been in immigration. Every 3 years, there's been a pretty big change.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like I hear that. Why does it feel like this the past 12 months? Or maybe it's related to what you said about the American conversations kind of spilling over and then everything just kind of blowing out of proportion. Just what it kind of feels. Um, I want to kind of go back to something you mentioned, which is when you talked about um the policies and you said about some policies are great, some are not so great. Because I know, like, so I have this it's like a battle, the tug of war in my head, which is two things. I believe wholeheartedly in the fact that the immigration conversation should be a Canadian conversation. So it's like immigration has to benefit Canada. Like, and we always have to think about it from that point of view, because it's so easy as an immigrant to feel victimized. But again, also you need to also understand the country has to look out for itself. So kind of seeing it from that point of view,
Right.
but also again, also, yeah, I also believe that we also need to be careful when we are having that conversation before we start treating people like as if they are units of data in an economic production Excel sheet. Like, oh yeah, if we
Uh-huh.
bring in
Yeah.
100 people, that sort of thing. And so it's just that tug of war in my head. It's like, how do you find that balance in the conversation? How do you find that balance in conversation? And so this is a really long way to just kind of ask the question, which is, so if you think about all the policies that we've had so far, like, which do you think are the three best ones that have kind of interest at heart? We don't have to talk about the ones that you don't think, so that we can leave that out of the conversation. But it was like, which ones do you think are the ones that literally have the Canada conversation at heart, which kind of benefits, is a win-win for both parties?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to kind of understand that and help myself too.
Um, Great question. One would be like the specific express entry draws. I think that that's a great idea. You're literally tackling the labor market. So that's a good way to be able to structure. I'm a big fan of express entry, the points-based system. Um, I'm a big fan. I don't like it. I don't like it as an immigration professional who has to help people because it's very fast changing. It's hard to keep a finger on things. That's the reason I don't like it. But I do love it as a Canadian and as someone who thinks for a program that's really malleable, very adjustable. I call it the hot and cold water bath. Yeah, it's a bathtub, and express entry is a perfect way to adjust it. If the water's too cold, you added some hot water, and if the water's too
Mm,
hot, you add some cold water. It's a perfect system. So specific draws, absolutely, I like that. I like that factor. The LMI, they put some changes there in terms of if they're in a metropolitan or certain regions with a higher unemployment rate of 6% or higher. I think that there's a level of that's a reasonable consideration, I believe as well. As long as they're taking into account, like certain knocks, which they don't really properly do so. But I think that that's overall a good concept to look at. The study permit caps and doing that. I think that is also not a terrible idea, but I think that it was just poorly executed. That should have been much more carefully planned. That was so avoidable, to be frank. It was very avoidable, and it was almost like willful blindfold, like, you know, being blind willingly, or
Yeah.
again, multiple truths exist, or just letting it go and letting the money come in too. So, you know, but I think that that's good. I would love to see, I don't see a reason why that, we don't have just proper planning from immigration. Well,
Yeah.
the reason why it's that there's a lot of siloed environments. So there's the municipalities, provincial governments, federal governments, and they're all pointing fingers. And it's a lack of accountability fundamentally is one of the challenges. But putting that aside, there is really no reason that we can't be able to develop a really good immigration system when we could actually adjust. Like, we literally have the ability to adjust and fluctuate. You know, we're an island, you know, Turtle Island. It's, you know, we have ocean surrounding us. So it's not like we have this crazy unexpected influx of people coming in by boats, or unfortunately we're trying to escape a tough situation. We do have pretty strong borders. We could be able to adjust when people are coming in, and making sure there's enough housing, and making sure there's jobs, and be able to manage that a bit better. But it's just a lack of coordination. It's not the lack of ability.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
this kind of leads into my last question, which is, because I feel like what you just where you ended this, and it's more like how do you, from on your perspective, because that's one thing I really want to push this year is how do we have a better immigrant conversation? Because it just feels like a lot of the times is this immigrant bad, that immigrant good. The federal government is to blame. No, the RCIC is to blame. Oh, the lawyers are the ones who are the great ones. Oh no, it's the, like, I'm just like, come on, all of you, because you know you what you just said now is so true. Like, why can't we have an immigration system that is planned out, and it accounts for all the various parties and how they feed into that system. And but I also feel like we also have a duty to start having certain conversations to probably not push us towards that, to do that end of things.
Yeah. The way we look at the immigration conversation is to first, we have to understand that immigration is needed, and there's a value, and we have a phenomenal opportunity. And we can't, you know, what's really made me very frustrated, and I was going to share a post, but I didn't. I held my tongue on this, but it made me, I was just so livid. You know, when we heard about because I've been seeing these changes happening real time. You know, I was at a conference with the international, with schools, for international school departments. You know, Mark Miller was there, the Minister of Immigration. Nothing, no big changes expected. And just a few days later, after that, talking to many people who work in the public sector. And a couple of days after, they ended the student direct stream, for example, right? So it's just that there is a level that we need to look at it from a human perspective, and we're not looking at immigration from a human perspective. We're just not. Like, we're looking at it from literally, like you said, a number, in this case a UCI number, you know, in this case quotas and targets. You know, keep in mind that we do not really interview people in immigration, right? Interviews are really unheard of now. Americans interview a lot of people. That's part of the immigration process. Not for all programs, for majority of them, from what I understand, they interview. They actually meet you face to face. They have a conversation with you. That doesn't happen in Canadian immigration in terms of unless you're in trouble, pretty much, or yeah, unless you're in trouble most of the time, right? So that's a that it kind of shares the issue to begin with. There was no human element to it, you know. Um, the citizenship, the citizenships, they want to do it over Zoom, and then you have you know, the citizenship, the Institution of Citizenship Canada. Those folks do amazing work with creating these beautiful ceremonies, and it's not nothing elaborate, just some care and love into it. And I went to one of them. I was invited to one of those ceremonies, and it was incredible. And it was mind-boggling to realize that this is one of the only human interactions in the immigration process, right? Like, like, the only person you're seeing in the immigration journey is the border, the CBSA, right? And that's about it. And soon it's going to be a kiosk, or, you know, sometimes you're even meeting a kiosk. Um, uh, you know, so that's the problem to begin with. We need to have a human element. Doesn't matter how much tech, doesn't matter how much efficiencies, we need to have some sort of a human element in the process. Once we have it in the process, then we could start having it as a system with a human touch. But if you don't even have a human in that process inside, I know it sounds elementary, it doesn't address it, but I do believe in the little detail makes the bigger impact, right? It's the little principle that you adhere to is what creates a better environment for everything. So I believe that we need to solve that first. So, that whole idea of doing citizenships on Zoom video, very bad idea. We have to nip, that's not a good place to start. And then let's at least have an interview process. So how do we create more human aspects? We have to share human stories. We have to also, and we have to create a better immigration system too. It isn't perfect. Okay. Like it is, like, yeah, there's our clients, great people. But you also have to keep in mind who calls us, who hires us, who doesn't hire us, right? Who's going to other RCICs and other lawyers in their local communities, for example. And I know for sure, and because I've dealt with situations, I've spoken to people where there is fraudulent documents, there is things being done. Like that's evident. There's no, that is not a, that's not a myth. It is true.
Yeah.
That does happen. There is truth that people are filing refugee claims and have no business filing refugee claims. There is truth that people are coming to Canada on false pretenses. There's truth of bad actors coming into Canada. That is true. So there is some truth to this. That has to be understood. However, that old adage of like, hey, just because you get like if you drive in a car and you get in a car accident, and
Mm,
does that mean
yeah.
you shouldn't drive, right?
Yeah.
So let's cut the bull on that, because immigration is really important and it's beautiful and it creates our neighbors. It creates a phenomenal country. And America's been built on the back of immigration. Canada's been built. Great civilizations are built on the back and support of people from around the world, right? Um, and we need to acknowledge that. And we have a phenomenal opportunity still, mind you, I do think it's depleted, to be a world leader in this space, right? We're so fixated on AI and quantum computing and cold fusion and robotics and all these phenomenal technologies. But when I look back at it, and if anyone's listening could correct me, but I do not know anyone in history that's actually succeeded in immigration, meaning they have succeeded in being able to immigrate people from different places, not to mention around the world. Okay, airplanes only were out in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
So, not to mention that consideration, but no one's effectively been able to succeed very well in immigration integration, right? Like at a very high level. And I believe
Yes.
Canada's is still the best in that space, right? America also has it's a different perspective, but I just think that there's a room for us to be innovative, for us to start thinking about it, for us to apply all of what we learned throughout psychology, sociology, the lessons from around the world. Data doesn't flow fast. Data is everywhere, right? You could literally jump on a Zoom call and speak to an immigration minister in France tomorrow. Well, maybe not us, but governments could. You could speak to universities, like so my point is that we want to look at this component of immigration with as much consideration as how we're putting energy into all these technology advancements, and really put a mindfulness to this and say, hey, Canada, we have a brand, we've already done this. We like, just like how hockey and Canada go hand in hand, immigration in Canada should go hand in hand, and we shouldn't be going to the Olympics and not even winning bronze here, right? We should be going to Olympics and winning gold and expected to win gold, right? So that's the way I see Canadian immigration, and we need to look at it from that perspective. If we could get this thing head on right, not to say it was failed before. I'm just saying to
It
that
could be
point, which
better.
we
Yeah.
have, again, we have the capabilities to, right? We have the ability to, we have everything available. We just need to get our stuff together and make that happen. And we could do and treat it as a challenge, right? And let's put that in. But if we could get that right, we will be, it would change, it would make the world incredibly better. And the reason why it's other countries could learn it. And the worst thing, and I've said this before, and I mean, and this is one of the reasons why I do the projects I do, um, my own ancestral story about my projects, but forgetting all that, the worst thing we could do to the world is taking people from a developing nation and bringing them to a country and impoverishing them more. That is
Yeah.
the worst. That will break the back of our world. So the best thing we could do for the sake of humanity is to be able to identify people who have what it takes and has what it takes, and maybe they're not the brightest in masters, but maybe they have that energy of being an entrepreneur. Maybe they have some other character. Like, we have to start looking at this from a different lens, from us, and seeing how we could do that, and then have them come in, get it right, and then other places could adopt similar strategies, right? Before we end the call, there's a gentleman by the name of Peter Zion. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he quite a smart guy. He's a geopolitical. I'm always get this messed up. He's in geopolitics, but he did a recap in immigration. And first off, he's very clear. Immigration, clearly a winner, a clearly economic winner, no question about it. But he said that Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, well, a little bit of the UK, but UK has advantage that Germany doesn't have, Japan doesn't have, and other places don't have. And that advantage is a society built on immigration. So when we see each other and we're like, oh, we're Canadian, or maybe I'm Trini or Fiji or Nigerian or whatever, but we're Canadian, like, there's no pull on that. Like, it's there. That's been from hundreds of years. It's been like that. You can't just build that society fabric tomorrow, right? It's
Yeah.
hard to do that, right? Whereas Germany and Japan and all those places, yeah, they're doing immigration, but it's not the same. It's not at it's at this layer. Canada and those countries I mentioned earlier, they're on a deeper layer. So if we can't get it right, who can,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of the way I look at it.
I can't add anything else here again. I'm just gonna end it here because that's such a good way to look at it, honestly. It's such a good way to look at it and think about it.
Like, we could dive into specific policies and all of those things, but personally, where I've been lately, especially in the last 6 months, I'm just looking at a higher level now. I want to really start tackling and start trying to solve these challenges with the government support or not. I think we could do it. Like I said, it's available, it's there, everything is there. Creating a better, transparent environment so people know what they're in for, right? Number one thing. So when I feel bad for immigrants and people coming in more than ever. And the reason why is because I know the story they've been told in their ears. I know the decision process that many of them made was on information that wasn't necessarily fully explained. Like, when someone does a consultation with me, I will say the journey of school, PR, graduate, work permit, PR, but the chances of that strategy staying the same is very low over a 3 to 5 year period.
Hmm.
Right? You see that statement isn't told to many people who come to Canada. And that is a really important statement. And that's on the best side of it. And then of course you get into different types of conversations and from fans of family saying, oh, you came and I did this and it worked for them, and hearsay, that's a
Yeah.
big problem. So it's not just immigration lawyers or consultants. It's there. It's the stories that, it's their agents, it's the governments are saying, like, it's not, the information isn't clear enough, and that's what we want to tackle. We start off first by transparency, right? Telling people what the real deal is and let them make the decision. And guess what? It might bring down immigration numbers. Fine, then adjust our programs, adjust our immigration policies then, right? Like I said, the worst thing to do in the world is to take someone from a developing nation and to impoverish them here. And we need to, I'm not saying we've done that. There's people who come here and done very well. So I'm not trying to brush that as a whole statement, but we need to think of that and make sure we're not doing that.
Thank you. Thank you, honestly. Thank you. This has been helpful. Especially what how I'm thinking of the conversation I need to have this year. This is really helpful. Thank you, Blayne.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for getting to this point of the video. This was an interesting one for me because 2024 felt like an open mic session for immigration changes. But I must say this. Thank you for all your support. I really appreciate it. I don't take that for granted. For subscribing, liking, sharing. I am grateful. We are grateful. Joel and I are grateful. As usual, please like, subscribe, share. If you know someone we should talk to, send them my way. If you have a question, please send them my way. Have a beautiful year.